Hey folks, Tim Newman with Soft Light Studios coming to you once again from Columbus, Ohio, where we are still, like the vast majority of the rest of the nation, on lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. That's fine. We're keeping a positive spin on this and a happy face, and we're bringing you new videos to look at every day, something to keep you entertained or teach you something you didn't know. In today's video, we are going to take a look at the opacity slider and the fill slider in the layers control panel. These handy little sliders are confusing to many, but we have a video we put together here that should straighten that right out for you. Take a look. So layer opacity versus layer fill. If you've tried to explore these two features on your own, you've probably been met with disappointing results. Turns out there's some very specific layer circumstances that have to be in place for the fill slider to work correctly. But once you understand what these circumstances are, it becomes easy to see that this is a simple way to generate some really cool looking effects on your layers. Let's hop over to Photoshop and explore this feature in depth. So I'm going to join you here on the screen in the corner for a minute and describe what we have here. It's pretty obvious, but we've got a picture of a metal wall that's got some peeling paint on it and some rust on it. Kind of makes for what I think is a nice textured background. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a text layer to this, and we're going to play with the opacity and the fill sliders. And I'm going to show you exactly what you have to do in order to make the fill slider effective. Let me get out of the way here so we've got the layers control panel back in view and we can see it clearly. So you can see here we've got our picture layer, and what we'd really like to do now that we have this picture layer active is we'd like to come over here and we'd like to just click on the text icon and create some text here on this layer. And I'm going to call it something clever like Rusty. Who would have thought? Now, one of the things that I typically do, and there are different ways to do this, is I'm just going to click on another layer to take me out of the editing mode. And then I'm going to come back to that Rusty layer, and I'm going to hit the V key to make sure that I've got the move tool turned on. Now, I'm going to start to drag this over to the right, and you'll notice as I drag it over to the right, I get that nice magenta guide from top to bottom that indicates that I am centered from left to right in this picture. And as I move down, you notice all of a sudden I get that horizontal guide going from left to right, which indicates that I am now centered top to bottom in this frame. So I'm going to let go of that, knowing that I've got my text there centered up here, no problem. Now what I'd like to do is just make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to click on that control handle, and it's going to take me into the resize mode here. And then I'm going to start to drag this up. Now by default, I am aspect ratio constrained. I definitely am going up in a vertical and horizontal size that is keeping the aspect ratio of this text. And I'm doing it outward in the direction that I'm pulling that move tool. If I add in the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on Windows, you'll notice that that sizing happens from the center. So I know that I'm still staying centered horizontally and vertically in this picture. So I'm going to let go here. I kind of like that size, nice and big. I can see it. And I'm going to hit Enter to commit that change that I've made to that text. Now it's time to play with those opacity and fill sliders. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to just hit the A key to undo the move tool. I'm gone to the direct selection tool, but gets rid of that transform boundaries around the outside of that text there. And we're going to take this opacity slider and we're going to slide it back. Well, it's doing what I expect it to do. I expect the opacity to change. And if I put it here at 50% opacity, it's a very predictable mathematical result here. That means that I'm seeing 50% of the word Rusty, and I'm seeing 50% of the background projecting through it. Opacity and transparency always add up to 100%. So if I come over here, I'm now 0% opaque and 100% transparent. Makes sense. So that slider's doing exactly what I expected to do. We're going to go ahead and take it back up here to 100%. Let's go down and play with that fill slider. Same thing. Let's drag this down to 50%. Well, I'm getting exactly what I would have expected when I adjusted the opacity slider. I'm getting what looks to be 50% opacity in the word Rusty and 50% of the layer below projecting through that. Certainly makes sense when I look at it. And if I continue to go back down here to 0% fill, well, that looks exactly like what happened with the opacity slider. So here's where people get confused. They don't see a difference. What is the difference between these two? Turns out the difference between these two has everything to do with having a layer effect or style applied to the layer that you're putting the fill slider on. So if I come down here to the layer effect icon and I say, you know what, let's go ahead and add a stroke to this. And we're going to go ahead and use this rust colored stroke here that we already have picked out. It's 30 pixels to the outside of the text. That makes sense, 100% opaque. It's nice and clear. So now we have that nice kind of maroon colored border around that. And once again, if I go up here and I adjust the opacity slider, it behaves very predictably. The text and the stroke border gradually disappear from view as I get down closer and closer to that 0% opacity. So let's put that back at 100%. Now let's try that fill slider one more time. Well, look at this. Down here at 50%, I'm seeing what clearly looks like 50% opacity in the fill of the text. Notice that keyword there. But that stroke border is not being affected. And as I continue to take the fill percentage further and further down, you see that the fill in that layer is becoming more and more opaque, and the stroke border is being left alone. So there we have a really cool outline of the word rusty. Now, if you weren't familiar with using that fill slider, you probably would have tried to go out and select this text, make a border around it with the selection tool, and filled that in with some color using the paint bucket tool. Turns out you don't need to do that at all. What the fill slider does is it makes everything on a layer set to the opacity level you pick, but it does not affect anything that's applied as a layer effect or style. So let's go ahead now that we've got our fill percentage set down here to 0% and come back here. We're going to double click on this effect panel here and let's add in an outer glow. Notice that that outer glow is there and it's immediately obvious. I can come in here and we'll just change the color of it real quickly to maybe that green color, just to make it fit in a little better with the color here. I like that. But you can see that anything I do with any of these effect layers or these layer styles gets left alone by that fill percentage. But the fill that's within those layer effects or styles is adjusted to affect the fill percentage that's picked out. All right, let's have a couple of closing thoughts here and then we'll wrap up. I think that's a really cool and powerful feature, and I think you can see real quickly how that's a lot easier to do than it is to go and try to outline some text and make a border around it or make a mask, what have you, in order to create this same kind of hollow text look. You can just simply adjust that fill slider. But for that fill slider to work, the layer that it's on has to have something sitting outside of the contents as a layer effect or style. Pretty easy, pretty simple, and now you know. So wrapping up here real quickly, glad you tuned in here today. Hope you really enjoyed the content in this, kind of a real quick video, but it just unlocks one of those real quick power tools in Photoshop that just makes things easier and faster for you when you're editing. I hope you're staying indoors. I hope you're staying healthy, and I hope you're staying safe. Let's all work on sheltering in place together and kicking this COVID-19 virus into butt. See you soon.